Hello, biology students. This is Dr. B, and we're going to finish up lesson 4.2 in the Deer Mouse Fur Color module of Connected Biology. Your questions. Let's spend a few minutes to explore the available controls and data displays in your breeding simulation. As you work, start thinking about what questions you might have and what you'd like to investigate. Once you start breeding a pair of mice, note that the Inspect Gametes button will be enabled. It will help you dig into some questions. Make sure it is on when breeding a pair of mice. So here is, we'll click on breeding, we'll click on inspect, and what can we find out? Well, we know the mom is RD/RL, which stands for receptor dark, the functional receptor that makes eumelanin, and RL, which stands for receptor light, the receptor protein that doesn't make eumelanin. So she's a medium brown, and she has one of each. Let's look at Dad. Dad has dark, which means both receptor proteins are functional, or both alleles produce functional proteins. What are some things that the results of your simulated experiments make you wonder about? Brainstorm and record at least 2 questions that you think would make for a good discussion or investigation. Consider questions you have that relate to genetics, cells, and populations. Well, let's explore the heredity pane just a bit more. Let's unclick here. Let's go back to our data here. And let's look at we have genotypes we can look at, and we have sex we can look at. My questions really wonder about how many offspring can a mouse really have? Is this data for one pair of mice, or is it really a community of mice in general? And other questions I have is why don't we get a light mouse here? Is there some kind of, or why don't we get some kind of light or dark here? You'd think if there was maybe a little bit of mutation in the population, something would pop out and you get light mice with a non-functional receptor protein occasionally. So I'm going to think about how does mutation factor in to the percentages we see in the simulation. You can see that they have mutations turned off down here. And once we turn on mutations, how will things might change? So take a minute to think. You don't have classmates to talk about this if you're working on your own, but what kinds of questions do you think people could answer with this kind of simulation? Because on the next page, it's our mission on the next page. We have our simulation reset, or I can go reset those for you. The simulation has been reset so that you can explore questions that your class has chosen, plus any other questions you may have. The first 3 questions below answer questions that your class has chosen, and the 4th answer one of your own questions. So if you have your own questions, excellent. We didn't have a chance as a class on YouTube to come up with questions. So you can either answer my or you can answer your own questions. If you do want to reset a breeding pair, you can simply reset and the data will disappear. So if you messed up and you want to start over again, you can just reset. I'll go to pair 3. Make that all gone. So when you're done with one question, you may want to reset your simulation to start the next question. So to the first question, does a medium brown parent always give the same allele to an offspring? You can use the allele inspector. So get some medium parents here. You can click on medium brown. You can click on gametes here, and you can show the different gametes that go to the different mice. So that might help you out with that question. If your white mouse and medium mouse breed enough times, will they get a dark mouse? Well, check that out in the simulator. There's a white and dark mouse. You could breed them several, 20, 30, 40, 50 times and see what happened. If you breed mice 300 times, will the results be the same as 200? That's a pretty easy question to answer. You could pick a couple pairs of mice and breed 200 times versus 300 times and see what happens. We missed the question here. Is there a pattern to the number of pups in each litter? I was noticing as I was breeding mice, I'd get 5, and then I get 5, and then I get 4, and then I get 5, and then I get 5. Sometimes I get 3, sometimes I get 5. Is there some kind of pattern? Is it seasonal, or does it depend on the age of the female mouse or the male mouse, or the food availability? I think that would be an interesting question to try to see just with our simulation, and who knows what the real answer is in real life. So there are 3 possible environments in the simulation: field, beach, and mixed. Does the environment affect the fur colors for the offspring mice? Now, we're not putting predators in here. To explore this, find someone who has a different environment displayed in the simulation and compare the offspring mice. Then justify your answer with data from the comparison. Well, you're going to have to generate all your own data from the comparison. Let's go back to population level. You remember this from the first part of the simulation when we first started working. And let's pick beach. We'll start with beach. We'll run the model with no hawks. There's no predators in this model. We're just going to let this run for about 30 months like we did before. We can get our pie graphs here. And interestingly enough, the beach mice, there's not very many light mice in this beach environment if there aren't any hawks. Interesting. So you can take the percentage, you can go back to 30, you can pick your own number, you can do 45 if you want to. Pick a number of months, do the same months for every environment, and then compare those percentages. So let's say 45. Let's run it for a long time. Or 44. It's easier to read that one. So we've got 78, 4%, and 18%. That's interesting. Let's change it to the field. Let's reset everything. Change it to the field and run it again without hawks, and let it run the same amount of time. So we'll let it run out to 44 months. We'll look, we'll compare, and we'll figure out if it's really the predators that are causing natural selection or the environment itself. There's 44. Looks like we have a lot more light mice Without predators, there's about half light mice in the dark environment. There's 37% medium and 15% dark. That's an interesting result. Let's try mixed. I'm going to reset. We'll run it out to 44 months, and you can compare the data. You should probably write down your data here so you can justify your answer. So when you run the sim out to 44 months or 30 months, whatever, you pick a number, for 3 different environments without predators, without the hawks, write down these numbers here and compare them. And then justify your answer. Make a conclusion from your data. In the simulation, pair 1 will never have any light brown offspring. Is this a good reflection of real life or not? Why or why not? Support your answer with evidence from the Inspect Gametes display and your knowledge of genes and DNA. So let's go to heredity. Let's go to pair 1. Let's breed out a bunch of mice here. They're never going to have a light mouse, it looks like, even out of 19 litters. Seems unusual. Well, let's look at the gametes here. Dad's all dark because dad is dark. Those are his alleles. So he can only give offspring a dark allele. Mom's RDRL, which means she has 1 dark allele and 1 light allele. She can give her, this is dad. He can give light alleles, but if you want to be a very light mouse and not just medium, you need 2 light alleles. And there's no way you can get 2 light alleles if one parent can only give you dark because they are dark. So there's pretty much no way one of these light mice could, or one of these offspring of dark and medium could be light, unless there was some kind of mutation. A particular pair may not create a mouse with the mutation, but if you looked at the entire population and you just had dark and light medium mice, you might create a light mouse with a random mutation. But that wouldn't likely happen for just one pair breeding. In the image, there is a pedigree of mice who live in the beach environment with no hawks. So this is a pedigree. It shows mice that mated, had kids. We'll talk about it when we blow it up here. Notice which mice are descendants of the first generation and which mice join the population later. Suppose that a hawk flies into an environment and eats some mice. In the pedigree, choose a mouse for the hawk to eat. Make your selection based on what you learned in Unit 1. Circle this mouse in blue. Do not eat a mouse from the first generation. So you can't eat one of these 2 mice. The hawk eats the mouse before it reproduces. So in blue, cross out every mouse that would have been born from the mouse circled in blue. Choose a second mouse for the hawk to eat, circle it in red. And then in red, cross out every mouse that wouldn't have been born from the mouse circled in red. So let's click this here. We're going to make our drawing. So we need blue to start out with. We're going to have a hawk come out, and this is a beach environment with no hawks. So let's say the hawk picks off this parent right here. Now, none of these mice would have been born if that parent didn't exist. Now we have to pick off another mouse. Let's pick off one of these medium mice here. And that picks off all these mice. Interesting. You don't necessarily have to pick out a mouse out of the second generation. You can go to the third generation. This is third, the fourth, or the fourth generation and see what happens. Compare your crossed out pedigree with a neighbor. As you discuss, you may want to consider, did you cross out the same mice? So do you think that kind of gets to the idea of, do you think the same thing would happen in nature multiple times? Do you think hawks would select the same mice you did? How did each of your pictures change? Well, you can look at your picture if you don't have a neighbor to compare to, and think about how many light and dark mice there would have been had there been no hawks, had you crossed out no mice. And then you might want to count the number of mice that would result dark, medium, and light with the crossed out mice in there. And how does that change the population? How do predators shape the population by taking out mice early before they can breed with certain characteristics? Describe how the pedigree is different now that you simulated the hawk preying on the mouse population. Well, let's go back here. Since I offed a couple of one dark mouse and one medium mouse, some of the dark mice here in the final generation have been nixed, and these dark mice, dark and medium mice, wouldn't have been born. So the ones that remain, we'll do orange here. You don't have to do orange if you don't want to, but these are the mice that remain, and they seem lighter than the general population. If I compare this population of mice to all the mice that would have been born, it's probably a little lighter, and you may want to count to get some good data and support your conclusion. All right, let's go to the next page. So make sure you do the Unit 4 summary. You can do question 2. You don't have to do question 1. Given what you know, explain how predators, the environment, mouse cells and proteins, mouse DNA, and inheritance all work together to influence mouse fur colors in a mouse population. You should have at least 4 sentences, probably 6. Write a very thorough paragraph if you want full points. This is really important so that you can combine all the wonderful ideas that we've learned in this unit into how exactly those hawks and the environment shape the mouse DNA. They eliminate some of the DNA by killing the mice, and how the DNA that's left creates different mouse cells and proteins, and how those different mouse proteins create different color mice over time. The population evolves over time with predators based on DNA, and that DNA codes for proteins. Of course, DNA is in mouse cells, and those mouse cells that we're talking about are the pigment cells that color mouse fur. So once you finish the summary, make sure your tables are all done, turn in everything all together. And when you want to turn things in, click Show All Answers. There'll be a little square right here. You'll click that, you'll get a menu. It'll say Options in very small print at the top. Click that Options button, click PDF, and then click Notability. I can't do it on my laptop. It works a little bit differently. If you need instructions, they're in Schoology. Thanks so much for working so hard. We'll go on to lesson 5.